What's up, everyone, and welcome back to Cinematic Reviews. As always, I'm your host, Chris, and this is a show about all things movies and TV. With it being May the 4th be with you today, I thought the best way to celebrate Star Wars Day is with a rewatch of one of my favorite Star Wars films, and that is Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, which is currently in theaters again for its 20th anniversary. I can't believe it's been 20 years since this film has been out. So I thought, what a great way to kind of reminisce in the past and rewatch one of the best Star Wars films that we have. I'll also be going over my Star Wars rankings since it's been a while since I've looked at those, and we'll see if I re-rank Episode 3 within there. Also, I'll be going over some news that has been released over the Season 2 of Ahsoka, and then I'll give a brief reaction to Andor Season 2, which is currently streaming on Disney Plus right now. At the top of the episode, though, I have a couple of announcements. With this episode coming out on May 4th, following that, the Daredevil Born Again review will finally release sometime next week. And then after that, I've been kind of looking over the schedule for 2025, and I think it's time to visit Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. So I will be reviewing all three movies in his trilogy: Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, and then finishing up with The Dark Knight Rises. Uh, those are my three favorite Batman films of all time. So I'm super excited to finally review those three movies on the podcast for you. So take a look at the social media pages for those dates and times on where those will be dropping. So with that, let's head over to news and reactions. So a couple of updates came through for Ahsoka Season 2. One of them is that Anakin Skywalker, who's played by Hayden Christensen, will be returning in Season 2. We last saw him in Season 1 of Ahsoka, as well as the Obi-Wan Kenobi miniseries. Also, we will be having the Rebels show up again, but this time they will be reuniting on the screen, which is awesome. We only got a couple of Zeb shots of him in The Mandalorian, and then we had Sabine and Ezra and Hera show up throughout Ahsoka, but all of them weren't really on screen together at the same time. So it's gonna be really, really awesome to get those guys along with Chopper on screen finally, since their days during the animated Rebel series, which is awesome. If you haven't seen the Rebel series, definitely check that out. It's right up there in my rankings, which I'll go over later on, with the Clone Wars, which is another animated series done by Dave Filoni. But Ahsoka, I really like season 1 of Ahsoka. You can go check out my review of that, which I did when that came out. And then whenever season 2 comes out in Disney Plus, I'll be reviewing that as well. I haven't really seen a release date for it. I got to assume with all these announcements coming out that it should be coming in the near future. Andor season 2 is going on right now, along with some of the other Rebel animated series like Rebels are streaming on Disney Plus right now. And then we have the Mandalorian and Grogu movie coming out next year, along with Ryan Gosling's Star Wars film Starfighter and some other projects that are in the works, along with Rey's solo film, which will see Daisy Ridley return to the Star Wars universe after her time in Rise of Skywalker. So yeah, there's a lot of Star Wars coming up. I'm really excited. I'm super excited for Ahsoka season 2, though. It's probably one of my favorite Disney projects that they have done. It's right up there with The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett, which wasn't a huge fan favorite. I really liked Book of Boba Fett. I even liked Obi-Wan Kenobi, which was kind of dragged through the mud a lot. And I'll be talking about that series when I touch base on Revenge of the Sith coming up here in the featured film segment of today's show, because I think Obi-Wan is a really good sequel to Revenge of the Sith, and I'll talk a little bit more on that. Uh, but yeah, so a lot of Star Wars projects coming up. Look for Ahsoka season 2 on Disney Plus whenever that drops out. It should be a really, really awesome series. probably going to be another, 6 to 8 episodes. I would probably lean more towards the six. It seems that Star Wars, aside from Andor, has been mostly in that 6 episode range. So, but that'll be awesome. And then speaking of Andor, I believe we're on episode 6 now out of 12. I've only seen like maybe the first 20 minutes of episode 1. Uh, with these Disney Plus shows, I typically like to watch them all when they're all aired. I have a hard time with this whole week to week thing with these episodes, so I usually just wait for all these episodes to stream, and then I'll binge watch them, and then I'll do the review on the show. So whenever all 12 episodes are aired and I've watched them all, that's when the Andor season 2 review will show up on the podcast. But from the 20 minutes that I've seen, it's going to be a really good season. I think I might actually like it more than season 1, which for me, if you listen to the Andor season 1 review that I did back when that came out last year, it was kind of up and down for me. It really didn't start really kicking off until I think it was like episode 4, 5, or 6, somewhere in the middle there is when it really got my attention. Otherwise, it was kind of like a slow buildup, which was really shocking to me because Rogue One is one of my favorite Star Wars movies of all time. I think it's probably the best project that Disney has done aside from the Mandalorian series. But I think Andor season 2 is gonna probably outrank season 1 in my Star Wars universe rankings. But we'll find out. I still have 11 episodes to watch, and we know how these shows kind of have its up and downs, especially those Marvel shows where it starts off really strong and then they just can't seem to finish the ending on these series. So I'm gonna go into Andor with an open mind. I know right now the Star Wars fan base is kind of toxic right now after the acolytes and some of the stuff that the Mandalorian season 3 did. But I think Andor is kind of taking us back to what we loved. Everybody loved Rogue One. Everybody loved Andor season 1. Uh, and now with Revenge of the Sith being re-released in theaters, that was a huge hit to fans of my age. We were kind of the target group back in the day in 2005 for Revenge of the Sith. So it's a good day to be a Star Wars fan. I know I say that a lot on this show, but it really is. So just keep supporting the franchise, and hopefully Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau will knock it out of the park with the Mandalorian and Grogu movie, and then eventually the Mandalorian season 4. But I think Tony Gilroy is doing a fantastic job with this section of the universe with Rogue One, and then both seasons of Andor, which is the prequel to Rogue One, which is the prequel to A New Hope. So, really, really awesome stuff coming forward. So, with that, let's dive into one of my favorite Star Wars films, and that is Revenge of the Sith. I'm really excited to finally just focus on episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Previously on the show, I did a review of the entire prequel trilogy together. Uh, but now I get to finally just focus on Revenge of the Sith, which I think is the best Star Wars film from that trilogy. I think it's one of the best Star Wars films that we have gotten in the entire saga. So I'm really excited to just finally focus on this, give my real deep thoughts on it, and kind of break it down a little bit. Um, this one I haven't really watched the most lately. When I was a kid growing up, like this was the Star Wars movie that I wanted to put on constantly. It was this, Empire Strikes Back, and then probably Phantom Menace just because of the Darth Maul fight at the end. But mainly it was this movie and Empire Strikes Back, so the two that I really, really wanted to watch as a kid. Now growing up, we have so many projects with streaming. We have the Mandalorian universe of the a part of this universe. We have, the Boba Fett series. We have the Obi-Wan series. We have the Ahsoka series. We have all the animated stuff with Clone Wars and Rebels. We have the sequel trilogy now. It's just a lot of Star Wars going around, and I don't get to watch this very often. So I'm really, really glad I got to rewatch this movie for its 20th anniversary, which I can't believe it's been 20 years already. Back in 2005, this was a huge movie. They really advertised the fact that this is the pivotal moment where Anakin is going to become Darth Vader. We're going to see it on screen as kids growing up with the original trilogy, with Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones coming out, we kind of knew George Lucas was building up to this moment where he was going to finally show us how Anakin became Darth Vader and what all kind of transpired with that, and what was the conflicts and what effects it had on the universe when he turns to the biggest villain in movie history, Sith Lord Darth Vader. So this was a huge movie growing up, and I'm super excited to kind of just break it down and give my thoughts. So, but before I get into that, I want to kind of give a little backstory on what 2005 was like for me. Like I said, growing up, a huge Star Wars kid. With the original trilogy and the Indiana Jones trilogy, those are my introductions into the movie world. I fell in love with movies because of those two franchises, Star Wars in particular. What George Lucas was able to do with the universe and leading up into The Empire Strikes Back, which is my favorite Star Wars film, I think, for sure. I always get tossed up between that and Rogue One. I think Tony Gilroy did a really fantastic job with Rogue One, but I think I'm going to stick with my guns and say that Empire is still my favorite Star Wars film, with Revenge of the Sith coming up behind it. And I'll go through all that with my rankings. I'm getting a little ahead of myself right now, but yeah, 2005, big year for Star Wars nerds. I remember going to this with one of my brothers, and then our grandpa actually took us to this film. It was quite an experience watching Anakin, on the big screen after seeing what he went through in Phantom Menace and then Attack of the Clones, and then just seeing the turn as a kid, seeing Darth Vader come to life, which was just an incredible experience. And then now rewatching it 20 years later, it still hits hard for me. Darth Vader slash Anakin is my favorite character in the entire Star Wars universe. You could tell because I'm wearing my Darth Vader hoodie right now with my Empire cap on. But Anakin is my favorite character in the entire Star Wars saga. And then, of course, with Anakin, you also get Darth Vader, and Darth Vader was the guy I liked to see on screen when I was a kid. Growing up, it was a lot of, I think my brothers and my dad, they were in the Obi-Wan, Luke Skywalker camp. I was more on the side of, no, I think Anakin is awesome. He's my favorite. He becomes this really badass Sith Lord in the end, Darth Vader, who's like the biggest villain of all time. Like, I'm sticking to my guns. That's my favorite guy. It's probably not the most common character that people like. More people, lean towards Luke, like I said, or Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon Jinn. And now you have, the Mando fans and the Grogu fans. Even the Moff Gideon fans are out there. But Anakin Skywalker is my dude growing up. And that's why this movie hits really close to my heart. And now watching it 20 years later, it hits even better. And I can't wait to watch this with my kids. It's going to be a fun time. So that's kind of the backstory of my relationship with this movie. So I just really glad I get to finally break this down and kind of give my real thoughts on this movie 20 years after it's been released. So, like I said, this is the movie where Anakin becomes Darth Vader. In this episode, you kind of have towards the end of the Clone Wars. So if you've seen the Clone Wars series, this episode kind of happens in the middle of it. I think up to until like season 5 or season 6 of Clone Wars, that's when episode 3 starts happening, and then season 7 of Clone Wars kind of happens in the middle to after episode 3 occurs, because that's during the whole Order 66 stuff. Is a lot of season 7 of Clone Wars. So this is kind of like smack dab in the middle of Clone Wars, which is really interesting how Dave Filoni was kind of able to work around it in that series. But at the time, when this movie came out, this was before Dave Filoni came up with the idea of Clone Wars. That didn't come till a few years later, and then how he incorporated it, which was pretty cool. So, but this movie in particular, I thought Hayden was great. I know there's been a lot back in the day. I remember, Hayden Christensen just getting trashed on a lot because of his acting, the way he portrayed Anakin. But now it's funny because all of us fans who supported Hayden back in 05, we're all adults, we're all in our 30s. And now he's bigger than ever. He was on the Obi-Wan series back in the Darth Vader suit, and then he was in a now he's in Ahsoka, where he's reprising his role as Anakin, the version of Anakin that didn't turn into Darth Vader. You know what I mean if you've seen the Ahsoka series. So it's really cool that Hayden's finally, getting the praise that he deserves. He's going to Star Wars celebrations. He's going to Comic Cons. He's making appearances everywhere, and it's really good to see him finally get the praise that he deserves after being this huge iconic figure back in the early 2000s with the prequels. So really good. And I think he's really good. The script, with George Lucas, it's kind of tough. He knows how to really build a universe. I just don't think he's the greatest, writer and director, especially director of actors. And his idea of a movie fully being on green screen, which is what this prequel trilogy was. I don't think it was a great idea. I kind of wish they would have went back to the old days with practical sets and puppets and all that stuff. But I understand, with the early 2000s, he wanted to kind of get ahead of the game. He wanted to reinvent, you know, I guess not really reinvent, but try to do something different to stand out. And he's really one of the first few that really kind of messed around with green screen. I know Robert Rodriguez was another director at the time with his Spy Kids movies, especially Spy Kids 3D, where it was fully green screen, CGI'd everything. So I understand, that aspect, especially with what Star Wars is, probably really attracted his mind at the time to really explore this idea of 3D. But now, 20 years later, after seeing what they gave us with The Mandalorian, um, what the sequel trilogy ended up being, I kind of wish, if we can go back in time and try to convince George Lucas to not lean into the green screen so much and just kind of go back to where everybody loved the originals for, which was the puppeteering, especially with Yoda. And then, some somewhat practical stages, models and stuff that they're bringing back now with some of these Disney projects where they're going back to the original way they created the Star Wars movies with all those neat camera tricks and practical stuff that they're doing, and trying not to lean so much into CGI, even though with the Vision screen that they call the blue screen that Disney uses now a lot for their Marvel and Star Wars shows. I know it's really cost effective and it's more convenient to film all these projects in one location, but it kind of takes away from what the original trilogy was. But anyways, I still think Revenge of the Sith is a pretty good movie, and I even have that written down in my notes where I wrote a note to myself where it says, "Is Episode 3 actually a good movie?" I kind of think it is. It's got a really fun beginning where we start off with Anakin and Obi-Wan rescuing the Chancellor. They have a really good lightsaber fight with Dooku. And then towards the middle, we kind of get through this chaos of all this war building up, dealing with the end of the Clone Wars, and then we get Order 66, Anakin Skywalker turning. And then at the end of the movie, we get this huge climactic fight between Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who are basically brothers to each other, forced to fight each other on this lava planet. And it's really awesome. It's one of the best saber fights. I think it's the best saber fight, if you ask me. I even wrote that in my notes too. Like, best saber fight in the entire saga. I think it is. I remember my brother and I growing up, we would practice that fight every day. I think we still can probably do most of the moves in sync from the movie. So, I think it is the best saber fight we ever got and probably ever will get on screen. Um, a close second would probably be the Darth Maul fight in Phantom Menace, which is really cool. Back in '99, going to the theater, seeing Darth Maul pop out his double lightsabers was like something we couldn't even think of as kids, and it was the coolest thing ever. But I think Anakin and Obi-Wan's fight on Mustafar was really awesome. And that's what kind of sucked about the Obi-Wan series. At least just a few of my kind of nitpicks to poke at it. I really wish that fight in Obi-Wan was back on Mustafar. I think it would have hit harder for fans like me seeing Darth Vader and Anakin fight again on Mustafar instead of some random ass planet that they went to. It was still a really cool fight. Like, I don't want this to turn into an Obi-Wan review. You can check that out back in the cinematic reviews archives, but that kind of built off of this energy that Revenge of the Sith put in. Um, and that fight at the end of Revenge of the Sith is just like one of the most iconic things that happened in the saga. Next to maybe, I even wrote this down, a list of epic moments in the saga, where we have Order 66, which is a huge thing um, to happen in the Clone Wars series. We've seen it ripple into the Mandalorian series with Grogu kind of remembering being there during Order 66. We've had some other projects that kind of linked back to it, like what was another one? I think Obi-Wan flashes back to it a little bit, and a few other projects have, but that's one of them. We have the birth of Luke and Leia in this movie, which brings us back to the going back to the roots of the universe where we had Luke and Leia in the original trilogy, these twins that are separated at birth, but then they reconnect, and Luke is this supposed savior of the Force that will bring balance, even though that prophecy was originally predicted to be Anakin. Turns out it was actually Luke Skywalker. So we get the birth of the twins. And then we also get Anakin turning into the dark side. So, like, this movie is kind of like at the center of the Star Wars universe. And so it's really cool to kind of look at that now after 20 years and just seeing how important this movie is to where we are now in the Star Wars universe, as the series and the movies that have come out since 2005. Like, this is like when you watch it in order, which I like to do sometimes, start from Phantom Menace and work my way up to the current uh, end of the timeline, which would probably be Rise of Skywalker until Daisy Ridley comes out with her movie. Watching all those in sync, it all kind of leads up to Revenge of the Sith, and I think that's what makes it such a powerful and important movie. And it's cool that it's finally getting the praise it needs, especially Anakin Skywalker's Hayden Christensen's Anakin Skywalker, which back in '05, like I said before, got totally dunked on for just the acting. Turns out he's like one of the most beloved characters ever, because all those fans from 2005 are all grown up and they're starting to voice their love for him and love for this movie. And it's really cool to have this movie really get risen up more. And to kind of spoil my rankings a little bit, it moved up in my rankings since the last time I reviewed this movie, back when I first started this podcast with the prequel trilogy review. Watching this for the 20th anniversary, it shot up in my rankings quite a bit. So I'm really excited to share where it lands in all those projects that we've had since 2005. But I don't want to just focus on Anakin Skywalker, even though he is my favorite character. We also have the other side of it, which is Obi-Wan Kenobi, played by Ewan McGregor, who is fantastic. He was. This is probably a hot take or an unpopular opinion, but I think he was really good in the Obi-Wan series. Um, that was another thing that people, specifically like die-hard Star Wars fans, really did not appreciate the Obi-Wan series because of the way they portrayed Obi-Wan. I think Hugh McGregor portrayed Obi-Wan very beautifully in that series, and I think it all kind of spawns from his emotional attachment to this movie in particular. I've loved watching interviews with him and how he talks about his experience on set with Hayden during this movie, and then bringing that energy back when they filmed Obi-Wan together, and just kind of how all those emotions came back to him, and it really made the Obi-Wan series really, really special. And I love watching this movie and then watching Obi-Wan Kenobi right off of it, because I think it's a really good sequel to this movie. Yeah, it's just, he's really fantastic in this movie. He's really good in the entire trilogy, but I think he really kills it um, in this movie, and then eventually into the Obi-Wan series. He was pretty good in Phantom Menace. He was really young in there. He was I think he was a apprentice still, or Padawan until he becomes a Jedi Knight in the Attack of the Clones, if I remember my timeline correctly. Um, and Attack of the Clones isn't a great movie. It's really on the bottom of my rankings. But he had spurts in there. Same as Hayden. Hayden had some spurts in Attack of the Clones, but I think that's a really bad example of what Ewan and Hayden are capable of doing with these characters as actors. Revenge of the Sith is really where they get to shine and to really connect with not just their characters but with each other, because their relationship, their brotherhood, is very, very important, I think, to the Star Wars franchise as a whole. And when they end up turning on each other at the end of the Revenge of the Sith, it's heartbreaking seeing these two guys that we have grown up with, who are basically brothers, and they turn on each other and they try to kill each other at the end. That'd be like me turning into the dark side while one of my brothers has to basically fight me to the death. That's a very emotional and very scarring moment. And you can see that melt into the Obi-Wan series when you watch it, where Obi-Wan is still haunted by the events of Revenge of the Sith. And that's why I love that series so much, is because it really shows how much PTSD and everything he has from this fight in Revenge of the Sith, which is one of the biggest moments in Star Wars history, is this fight on Mustafar between them. It's just really, 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 really special to start talking about this, 20 years later, and how important this movie is to the Star Wars saga as a whole and what it means to us fans like me. So, really, really great. Love him in there. Um, we get other characters back, like Mace Windu, played by Samuel L. Jackson. Um, Natalie Portman is back as Queen Amidala, who unfortunately dies during childbirth. That's one of the hiccups I have with this movie, is I still don't really understand how she died. I think George Lucas probably could have written that a lot better. All we really get at the end is, she's kind of in and out of it after Anakin force choked her, which I think is how she actually dies. It's not really clear in there. When we get to the hospital wing, the little robot comes out and says, you know, she's perfectly healthy, but we don't understand why she's dying. It's like she lost the will to live. Like, even for Star Wars, that's some force mumbo jumbo crap, to where George Lucas kind of like wasn't able to figure out how exactly to kill Padme. He just knew that she had to die because we need to separate the twins out to kind of keep the story going in A New Hope. I think the Emperor kind of clears it up at the end, where after Anakin gets thrown into the Darth Vader suit, we have the epic moment of him rising off the table. You have the iconic breathing, and then he talks about briefly with I could feel her, she should be alive, and Emperor makes the line of, seems like in your anger you killed her, which I'm assuming is referencing back to the force choke that he did on her in Mustafar. So that's how I assume that she died. He was force choking her too much to where she couldn't do it. I think George Lucas is just like, well, Anakin turned to the dark side. She couldn't live with herself with that, so she died. That's some weak crap, if you ask me. Like, that's some writer mucky crap. Like, I don't. They could have written that a lot better. That's been one of my hiccups with this movie. Even as a little kid growing up, it still bugged me. Like, I don't really understand how exactly she died. I might have to research it. Maybe George Lucas has explained with this in interviews, or maybe even Natalie Portman has explained it. But even watching it in preparation for the podcast today, I still don't quite understand how she freaking died. I'm just gonna believe that Anakin force choked her, and that caused her to have died in childbirth. I think that's the best way I understand it. The whole, she lost the will to live because Anakin turned to the dark side. That's really weak for me, and I just can't get on that bandwagon on how she died. But I could be wrong. But that's just my take on it. Um, what else do I have on here? Lightsaber fights. There's quite a bit of lightsaber fights on here. I've talked about the Obi-Wan and Anakin one on Mustafar. I love the choreography on there. I love going back and watching the commentary and the behind the scenes stuff that they did, where Hayden and Ewan actually practiced these moves, and they did a lot of them themselves. Of course, with some of the jumping and them being around lava. They were on a green screen, they're on a stage, but all this choreography they weren't really stunt doubles. That was Hayden and Hewen actually doing that stuff on the stage with the camera in front of them. So that's just fantastic. That makes that scene even better when we found out that like Hewen and Hayden like spent weeks and months on this one fight because they wanted to do it themselves. It's really cool. Definitely check out those behind the scenes. It's really fascinating how they filmed that fight. It's really cool. Some other fights. We have the big uh, Darth Sidious versus Mace Windu and a bunch of other council members in his little office. That's where we get revealed that he is Darth Sidious. He pulls out his little gold lightsaber with the red beam on it, showing that he actually has a lightsaber this whole time and he knows the Force. So, really cool fight though. Eventually, Anakin comes in and kind of just wreaks havoc on Mace Windu, I guess. That's really the moment where he turns into the dark side, is him cutting off Mace Windu's hand and the Emperor launching him out the window with his force lightning thing that he does with his fingers. This is which leads me to this topic, which is an argument I have with my dad a lot. Is Mace Windu still alive? Me personally, I'm on the side where Mace Windu's dead. He had his hand cut off, he got electrocuted, and he's throwing out 1,000-foot, 1,000-story building to his death. Now, my dad, the way he explains it is, no, we've seen Anakin get his hand cut off. We've seen Luke get his hand cut off. We've seen Luke get struck by lightning. Surely, maybe he landed on some kind of platform or somebody who happened to be driving by and picked him up. That's a little weak for me. Until he actually comes back on screen, I'm on the assumption that he's dead. I think if George Lucas kept him alive or wanted him alive, I think Dave Filoni or Jon Favreau would have brought him back already. So I think he's actually dead. Maybe there's a book out there where they explain that he survived, but I honestly think if George Lucas meant for him to live or wanted him to live, I think we would have seen him in a show or a movie already. So I'm under the assumption that he is dead. Until I'm proven wrong, that's what I'm going to think of. But that's a huge argument I see online. Like I said, particularly between my dad and I, we always argue that when we talk about this movie. I guess we'll see who's right in the end. I'm still going to stick with Mace Windu's dead and he's not coming back, which sucks because I like Samuel L. Jackson as Mace Windu. I think him, Jules from Pulp Fiction, and probably Nick Fury from the Marvel Universe are probably my favorite roles of his. It was really awesome as a kid seeing him pull the purple lightsaber out in Attack of the Clones, which if you don't know the side story on that one, he actually requested to George Lucas that, like, I want to be different. I want a purple one. And George Lucas is like, all right, you get a purple one. So that was a pretty cool reveal too, when the behind the scenes of Attack of the Clones came out, where Samuel L. Jackson's like, yeah, I wanted a purple lightsaber, and George gave me a purple lightsaber. So it's pretty cool. What else? The Dooku fight at the beginning was pretty crazy. As a kid in 2005, seeing Anakin cut off Dooku's head was pretty wild, even though we saw him kill a bunch of sand people in Attack of the Clones. But this was pretty wild, seeing Anakin, who is supposedly the hero of the story, decapitate, Count Dooku right in front of Palpatine, which is pretty wild. But that fight was pretty cool. We get a little bit of Obi-Wan until Dooku basically knocks him out, and we get this 1v1 between Anakin and Dooku, which is kind of their way of setting up Anakin turning to the dark side, with him killing Count Dooku, aka Darth Tyrannus, and then leading into, killing Mace Windu, and then Order 66, where Anakin attacks the Jedi Temple, which is pretty wild. I honestly wish they probably could have shown more. If you played the video game Revenge of the Sith, which is one of the greatest Star Wars games ever made, you actually get to play as Anakin through the Jedi Temple and murdering a bunch of Jedi in there. So, of course, this is also is where he kills the younglings, which is really really messed up, even for a Star Wars movie. But hey, that's the way the world works, I guess. In here, he I think I know there's even some part of the fan base that really believe that he didn't kill them. He just kind of tucked them away to become Sith apprentice. Those kids died. I mean, all power to you if you think you know he saved those kids, but I'm gonna break it to you pretty tough. Those kids died. It sucks to say, but Anakin Skywalker killed those kids. So you just kind of have to live with it. Another thing that really makes this movie awesome is all the flashbacks of Mandalorian does, with kind of showing different parts of the action that happened during the temple. I think Obi-Wan kind of touches on it a little bit. Ahsoka touches on it a little bit. But the Mandalorian series really shows you the chaos with Order 66 inside the temple itself. I think Dave Filoni did a fantastic job with that. I wish we would have seen more in this movie. Maybe George Lucas just decided not to get too violent in this movie. He probably wanted to save all that for the Anakin Obi-Wan fight, but I feel like we probably could have gotten more with the Jedi Temple and Order 66. But we did get, the planet hop between uh, different members of the Jedi Council getting killed by their clones, like Keanu Mundi, a few other ones that I can't remember the name of. Uh, they go against Obi-Wan on Utah with Commander Cody, but he ends up living. And then Yoda and Kashyyyk, his clones turned on him before the Wookiees were able to protect him. Or, well, he killed the clones. The Wookiees kind of escorted him off the planet. But yeah, Order 66, the biggest moment uh, in Star Wars, which basically is the catalyst for everything that happens afterwards. The Empire becomes a thing in the original trilogy. Darth Vader, the Emperor, they're in power now. They're going around the galaxy, conquering planets, blowing them up with their Death Star. Like, Order 66 was like a huge moment in this movie. And as a kid, watching the clones turn on the Jedi was freaking wild at the time. All the Emperor had to do was say Order 66, and it like triggered a chip. If you've seen the Clone Wars, it triggered like some kind of chip in their brain. Um, and it makes them basically a drone or a slave to the Emperor, who basically is in charge. Because, how do I put this? So when the clothes were made, the powers went to the Chancellor. So whenever the Chancellor says his code, they're now enslaved to him. If you've seen like the Bad Batch and some of the Clone Wars episodes, um, some of the clones like took the chip out of them, and they were able to kind of bypass Order 66 and kind of go on their own. But that's like the layman's term of it. Is they were enslaved to the Chancellor because of that chip in their brain where they were when they were created, so to speak. So, but yeah, Order 66, huge moment in Star Wars, huge moment in this movie. Um, but yeah, it's just really awesome. I do have one more question that I always note and I always talk about when I talk about Revenge of the Sith, and that is, what if Qui-Gon Jinn never died in Episode 1? Would Anakin not have turned to the dark side? My side of this question is he wouldn't have turned. I think Qui-Gon would have trained him correctly. I think he would have respected Qui-Gon a little bit more than he did Obi-Wan, because Qui-Gon was like a father figure to him, where Obi-Wan was kind of just a brother figure, an older brother, but just a brother. But I think Qui-Gon would have prevented Darth Vader, I think. That's just what I think. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. That's just how I feel. That's how my brain works. Um, I am curious to see what other people think. So I'm going to post that question actually on the social media pages for the podcast. And I want to know what you guys think about it. I'm on the camp Qui-Gon would have prevented Darth Vader. That's just me. But I'm curious to see any other thoughts on that question, because I think it's the one question that I always ask after watching the prequel trilogy is, how would this have happened differently, or maybe it would have happened the same if Qui-Gon Jinn would have never been killed by Darth Maul. I think it would be a completely different trilogy. I think it would be a completely different universe. And that's probably why George Lucas had Qui-Gon Jinn die. But that's just how my brain works with these franchises. The multiverse aspect of it. What if Qui-Gon Jinn lived? What if Anakin never turned to the dark side? What if Anakin became a Jedi Master on the Council? What if it was okay for him to marry Padme and not to keep her in secret? What if Luke and Leia never got separated? There's 100 different things that could have happened, but I think the moment that put Anakin on this track was Qui-Gon dying in Episode 1. I don't think his mom would have died. I don't think him and Padme had to go into hiding. I think Qui-Gon dying was a really pivotal moment in this trilogy, and it would be a completely different universe if he would have lived. But like I said, I'm going to post that on the social media pages. Feel free to comment on it. Feel free to comment on this episode on YouTube with your thoughts on the question, because I'm really curious to see what other people think, But that's just where I am. Let me check my notes to see if there's anything else I'm forgetting. All I wrote on my notes was early 2000 CGI. Not the greatest CGI in the early 2000s, with the Spider-Man movies, with the X-Men movies, the Star Wars movies. Watching it now, anything today just blows the CGI out of the water with this. But for the time in 2005 for this movie, it was pretty cool seeing this. Just Phantom Menace in 99 was pretty cool with that CGI. Even Attack of the Clones, with that being a terrible movie in 2002, the CGI was pretty wild watching that as a kid. But I always like to bring up the early 2000s CGI because that's, seeing it now, it's pretty rough stuff, especially, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, which I absolutely love. The CGI in there is kind of egregious, and that's kind of where Star Wars is too. Even in this movie, there was some egregious CGI in here, particularly with the clones, on how they look in there, because George Lucas is basically copy and pasting them everywhere because they have the same face. So it's really rough to watch some of the CGI, but I think the best one is probably the Anakin Obi-Wan fight, which I gotta imagine George Lucas probably really wanted that to be perfect. So he probably put all of his energy and all his time into that, and just kind of mess with the budget a little bit. And it's new technology he was testing too at the time. So it is what it is. It's early 2000s. We can kind of make fun of it now, but at the time, I remember it kind of blowing people's minds, especially my age group, which those prequel movies were made for, was my generation, just like the original trilogy was made for my dad's generation. So it's just kind of you had to be there at the time, sort of thing. But now with The Mandalorian and Ahsoka, the CGI has gotten a lot better. So it's really fun to imagine what would the CGI look if Revenge of the Sith came out today. So really, really cool stuff. Well, that's all my thoughts on Revenge of the Sith. Like I said, I'm going to post some of these questions on the social media page, especially the Qui-Gon Jinn one. Really curious to see what you guys think of it. Also, feel free to comment on the video on YouTube with your thoughts on it. But yeah, so to wrap up today's episode, I'm going to go through my Star Wars universe rankings. So let me pull up my rankings here. All right, here we go. So I'm going to go through these. This has my newest ranking for Revenge of the Sith in there, which is slot number 8, which I can't remember what it was before, but it skyrocketed up to my third favorite movie. It's at number 8 because there's TV shows in there along with the movies. That's just how I rank these universes. I do movies and series together. I know it seems kind of weird, but that's just how I do it. I know some people will do the show separately and the movies separately. Me, I like to have one giant list of the entire franchise. So that's why it's sitting at number 8, which seems kind of low, but it's actually the third movie on my list. So I'm gonna read through these, and I'll kind of go over my thinking behind it. Number 1, The Mandalorian season 2. Number 2, The Mandalorian season 1. Star Wars Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back. Number 4 is Rogue One, a Star Wars story. 5, Star Wars: The Clone Wars. That's all 7 seasons. I think it'd be kind of egregious if I went and through every single season. Um, but I just kind of, with the animated shows, I just put them as a whole because there's way more seasons of those, way more episodes. So the entire Clone Wars series I have at number 5, followed by Star Wars Rebels at number 6. Again, that's all 4 seasons, all the episodes together. That is my overall ranking for it. Number 7, that's where The Mandalorian season 3 goes, which might be a little kind of a hot take. I liked season 3 of The Mandalorian. Yes, I had a couple of nitpicks for it, particularly the Jack Black episode. But overall, I really liked the season 3 of Mandalorian. I know a bunch of people didn't care for it. That's fine. That's their opinion. Me personally, I liked it, so that's why it's number 7. Number 8, like I said, Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. That's my newest ranking for it. Number 9, The Book of Boba Fett. Again, not a fan favorite, but I really like it, so it is in my top 10. And then at number 10, Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, which I absolutely love. Seeing the green lightsaber as a kid was freaking incredible. And I really liked the Luke Skywalker Darth Vader fight at the end. So I like that movie. Number 11, that's where I have Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Number 12, the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. 13, Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, which I actually like. 14, Star Wars The Bad Batch. 15, that's where I have Andor Season 1. 16, Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. Followed by 17 with The Last Jedi. 18, The Phantom Menace. 19, Attack of the Clones. 20, Solo: A Star Wars Story, which I have a hard time watching, even though I love Star Wars. 21, Skeleton Crew, which I wasn't the biggest fan of, because I think it's mostly because that was really aimed towards kids. But I'm actually going to give that one, and then The Acolyte, which I have last of 22. I'm going to give those a rewatch and see how I feel now, a year or so later after it aired. But those two for sure are my least favorite. And those, of course, are the newest projects from Star Wars. Right now we have Andor Season 2. I really don't have a guess on where that's going to go. Maybe above Season 1, kind of back to back there. But we'll find out after all 12 episodes air during my review. But like I said, Revenge of the Sith moved up to number 8. Really love the movie. Really close to my heart with everything I talked about before with Anakin Skywalker turning into Darth Vader, the epic fight on Mustafar between Obi-Wan, him decapitating Count Dooku, him fighting Mace Windu, his relationship between Obi-Wan, his relationship with the Jedi and with Padme. I think it's a good movie. That's why it's in my top 10. Maybe after a few rewatches, maybe it'll scale up a little bit more, getting past some of those animated shows. But for right now, after my rewatch, after 20 years, it's sitting at number 8. But yeah, I really love this movie. I don't think there's much more I can say about it except for I just absolutely love it. Can't wait to watch it again. Can't wait to watch it with my kids. Just a really awesome movie close to my heart. So that is it for today's show. Again, Daredevil Born Again episode will be coming out next week. And then we're going to dive into Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy while the Andor series is streaming on Disney Plus, along with The Last of Us Season 2 is streaming on Max. I will do separate review episodes for those. But in the meantime, while those are streaming, we're going to dive into Christopher Nolan's Batman universe. So be on the lookout for those episodes as well. So Until next time, may the 4th be with you all. Later, everyone.